Hello my loves. Firstly, I'm really sorry for the lack of videos recently, and also if my voice sounds slightly off throughout this, it's because I got sick. I'm okay now, I'm fine. So we can go back to our regularly scheduled complaining, which is what we're doing today. I'm a big believer in reading being very much personal preference. What you enjoy is what you enjoy, and what counts as a good book is quite subjective and is going to be different from person to person. However, I've recently read a series. Apparently, I missed it, but apparently got quite big on TikTok. It was genuinely, I think, one of the worst things I've ever read in my life. Made me incredibly angry, and I ended up reading the whole series just out of spite. And today I just want to complain about it. This is the Artefacts of Ouranos series, with the first book, I think the one that kind of took off on TikTok, being The Trial of the Sun Queen. And just a brief disclaimer, I am not generally a massive fan of most of the romantasy that does well on Book Talk, so I am aware that I was probably not the target audience for this book. With that being said though, I can appreciate a good romantasy from time to time. For example, I read Quicksilver recently, and I can fully appreciate that that was not the best book, but I had a really good time listening to it and reading it. There have been plenty of shitty romantasies that I have talked about really enjoying. This was not one of them, and genuinely I think this was just bad. Of course, this is all entirely my own opinion, so if you did like this series, this might not be for you. That's fine. You don't have to watch this if you don't want to. Also, brief warning, this video will contain spoilers because some of the things I need to complain about, I basically need to spoil the entire plot of the first book to be able to do that. So if you haven't read it and at this point you still want to read it, maybe come back after. So I am just going to give you the briefest overview I can possible of the general plot, mainly of the first book, kind of some of the other books. Really, the other books, the plot just becomes an absolute mess, so I'm not going to bother explaining all of it. Ouranos is built up of several different kingdoms that all run by different imperial fae. Law, who is our main character, unfortunately, is imprisoned in Nostraza, which is a prison in the Aurora kingdom. We're not told at the beginning of the book why she's there. She's just been in prison since she was 12, and she's now like 24, I think, and she's there with her brother and sister. Right at the beginning of the book, she gets like a punishment because she had a fight with someone else in the prison, and she's sent to the Hollow, which is basically like isolation, but like next level. It's a massive pit in the floor where there's no food or water. There's no way she can climb out. She's just sent there for 2 weeks. She's pretty sure she's gonna die, and then she just suddenly mysteriously gets rescued by this random person, and when she wakes up, she's in a completely different kingdom. She's in the kingdom of the Sun King, and basically she's told, oh, you're here because you're gonna take part in the Sun Queen trials, which she's never heard of before because she's from the Aurora kingdom. And what that basically is like when the king needs a queen, he holds these trials. It's like a tradition in their kingdom. He holds these trials, and whoever wins will then stand before the mirror, which is like an ancient magical artifact. Each kingdom has their own version. It's not all mirrors, but theirs is a mirror. The mirror will say whether that person who's won is the rightful queen of the Sun Kingdom or not. So Law's basically been kidnapped and taken there to take part in these trials to maybe marry the king. Except it should just be people from the Sun Kingdom. So all of the other people taking part, I can't really remember how many of them are. All of the other people taking part are all fae from noble families in the Sun Kingdom. Law is a human who is obviously from the Aurora Kingdom. So the king is telling everyone that she's from like the slums area in the Sun Kingdom, and she's there to like remind everyone that no matter their station in life, they can still potentially rise up if they win the trial. But the king knows she's not really from the Sun Kingdom, and so does the guy Gabriel, who's assigned to watch over her, like a guard essentially. They won't tell her why they've taken her or like why they wanted someone from the Aurora Kingdom to take part. The actual trials are like, there's one where they have to answer questions about the Sun Kingdom's history while they're dangling from a rope, and if they answer one wrong, they might fall into a lake and die. There's an obstacle course, obviously, and then there's also like a ball where they have to steal something from someone. None of them make sense for what the Queen's duties would be, so I don't really know how they're trying to prove anything. It's obviously just the author's way of trying to get death games into that, because obviously you need to have them in romantasy. There always has to be that there, right? Yeah, Law manages miraculously to just get through all of them, fine. And all the while they're doing all the trials, there's like opportunities to talk with the king, whose name is Atlas. He takes an obvious instant interest in Law, and despite there being literally no chemistry between them, and Atlas having all of the personality of a wheelie bin, she immediately falls in love with him. There are frequent hints throughout this that he's up to something, or he knows more than he's saying he is, and there's like nefarious reasons for him being so interested in Law. And when I say there's hints, I don't just mean to us the reader, I mean to Law as well, and she just ignores all of them because she's an idiot. In the final trial, it's like a maze where they're not really told what they have to do, but you know, like in the Hunger Games with the mockingjays that would mimic their loved ones' voices being in pain and would send them like running after them. That's essentially what happens in this maze. Obviously it's not birds because I'll be copying it too much. There's like projections of their loved ones, but Law thinks they're actually real, so she thinks her brother and sister are there and in danger, and she's like trying to protect them, and she manages to get to the middle of the maze and keep them safe, and that was apparently the goal. She's like, Atlas, are my siblings okay? He's like, they're not really there, that was just a trial. And then is the moment she decides to be like, there's something off about you. She gets really angry, starts shouting at him. There's a whole crowd there, by the way, and he's like, I don't really give a shit, you need to stand in front of the mirror because you've won. There's also another Fae woman who has hated Law the whole way through. I think her name was Aprecia or something. She also managed to get through, so it's just them two left. No one else has got to the end of the trials. Both of them have to stand in front of the mirror. The mirror is like, Law, no, you're not the rightful queen. And Atlas is fuming about this. Clearly he desperately wanted to marry Law, so he then imprisons her because he wants to try and find a way to marry her anyway. That is the first book. Throughout all of this, by the way, we also get chapters from another point of view of a guy called Nadir, who is the prince of the Aurora kingdom. His chapters are completely pointless and I think ruined the plot further than it already was, which is why I haven't commented on them. So obviously Law was imprisoned by them at the beginning, by his dad, and she's now missing because she's been taken by the Sun Kingdom. So his dad is trying to find out where she is, and it's basically Nadir's job to try and find that, but he's worked out that his dad is maybe not telling him something, and that Law is actually maybe a more important prisoner than just your standard one. So he's kind of going against his dad, trying to find out who she is and why she's so important. They also briefly meet at the trial where all of the contestants had to try and steal something from someone else at a party. Nadir and Law meet, and it's like there's this like instant spark, there's this instant like tug towards each other, and it's abundantly obvious what's going to happen. That is a really brief only bit of interaction that they have, except obviously Nadir finds out she's the prisoner he's been looking for. So book 2, Nadir and his friends kidnap her, take her back to the Aurora kingdom, but they don't tell his dad. He's trying to find out who she is. Basically Law is secretly the heir to a kingdom that has like no power anymore, and everyone thought all of the heirs were dead, called the Heart Kingdom. This was also hinted at throughout the first book, and the foreshadowing was so obvious that I'd worked out immediately. So she finally reveals that, and then basically the rest of the books are them trying to get her kingdom back and also trying to take down a god that for some reason that needs to be part of it as well, even though trying to get the kingdom back and go against Nadir's dad who wants her for her power, and also the Sun King who wants her for her power. Like there was already enough going on, but there's a god thrown in there too. Also, of course, throughout all of this, there's the whole Nadir and Law relationship. So basically for books, is it all of book 2, she just hates him? Or is it in book 3 as well? I can't remember, but for a lot of the time she just hates him. His chapters are all just him thirsting after her. That's all they are. He has no personality aside from fancying her, until one day she realizes they're mates, and then all of a sudden, like literally instant change. Oh my god, I love you. Oh my god, I've always known it was you. No, you fucking didn't. You hated him until yesterday. But anyway, so they get together. Then yeah, they're like trying to get her kingdom back. They manage to get her kingdom back. They manage to take down the god. It gets so confusing. Just so many different things happening. But of course, they manage to do all of this. They manage to do this, and there's a happy ending. Wonderful. So glad for them that they get to live together forever and be annoying with each other. Oh, also, not really super relevant, but Laura is actually a fae. Like she was just in human form for her safety. She's actually fae, and literally the reveal of that like seemed like a really big thing, and then her suddenly turning back into her fae form was just like, oh yeah, by the way, she did that by now. I think the word was literally like, I was in my fae form now, and that was it. There was no like big reveal of what she now looked like. It was so shit. That's like the key parts, right? Okay, there was so much happening. It was so convoluted that I'm not going to explain all of it right now because I don't need to. If you do want a whole plot of overview, let me know and I'll suffer through it. I'll do it. So now we come to my criticisms of this book, right? You may have already been able to guess at some of them from my overview there. Let's start with characters, right? Law herself as a character is genuinely the most irritating, unlikable main character I have ever come across in a romantasy book. And I have read Fourth Wing. That is saying something. She is admittedly the worst in the first book. She gets slightly less irritating as we go through. Generally, she just acts like a 15-year-old. Just complains constantly. Her internal monologue is so whiny. And you might say, Nikki, she's kind of going through a rough time. Like, you can understand her complaining, but it's the way she complains about everything. It is so childish and so whiny, and not the actions of someone whose prefrontal cortex is nearly fully developed as hers should be. Her thoughts and opinions just flip-flop so much. She goes from absolutely hating Nadir, and then all of a sudden, overnight, she loves him. There's no gradual change in that. She just suddenly loves him, and everything's forgotten and they never fight again. And the same with Atlas in the first book. Initially it was, oh my god, I'm so in love with him, and all of a sudden it was, actually I hate him now. Like, it's just so sudden and so unrealistic. She was also just so incredibly stupid, like so stupid. There are so many hints in the first book that Atlas is not a good person, does not have good intentions, and is clearly not actually in love with her, and she just ignores every single one of them. I don't mean this to sound as bad as it's gonna sound. She's a fictional character, it's fine. There is literally no reason for Atlas to be interested in her. If we're going with what like the setup of the trials is, that they just let one of the poor folk join, right, just for the show of it, just to be performative about like, look, we allow poor people in too, then there's no way he'd want her to win. Obviously it's not set up for them to win, so there's no gain for him in that. She's human amongst, I can't remember how many, it's like maybe 9 fae who are said to be like the most beautiful fae in the kingdom. She doesn't have a great personality to work with. There is no reason he would so instantly like her, and she knows that he knows that she's from the Aurora kingdom and that she was from Nostraza, and she knows that she's the heir of Heart, right? She knows she has this hidden magic and power. She knows that, but she never stops to think, this doesn't make any sense. Potentially he knows more than he's saying, and there's a reason that he's trying to get me to win so hard. It's important to note at this point, when 2 fae marry, their powers like join and get more powerful. She as a human would have no powers, right? There is no reason that a king in charge of a country would want to marry someone who would not further his own powers and enable him to better run his kingdom and protect it and get more status. Like, there is no motivation behind that. She never stops to think, even though there are so many hints that he clearly has ulterior motives and there's a reason behind it, and that maybe he knows who she really is. She just ignores all of it. She overhears a whole conversation between him and Gabriel, the fae who's like guarding her. It's like Gabriel being like, why do you want her to win so bad? It doesn't make any sense. If you just told me, maybe I could help you. Like, can you just explain to me what's going on? And Atlas is just so shady and so obviously hiding something. And Law's takeaway from it is, well, clearly Gabriel hates me and he wants me to lose, so I can't marry the king, so now I hate Gabriel. She also, just a little aside, throughout the whole book, Law's internal thoughts are like, Gabriel is the worst. Gabriel has such an awful personality. Nadir's chapters even say the same thing, that like everyone just agrees that Gabriel has like an unfortunate personality and he's really rude and awful. There is literally never a single shred of evidence for that in the books. He is never that bad. He is serious, maybe more stoic, but like if you're gonna really ham up that a character is awful and rude and mean, show it. Because he doesn't come across that way at all. And again, it just makes Law look like she's whining about nothing, because there is no evidence of Gabriel being like that. I've already said, Nadir has no personality. In the first book, he maybe has a little bit, because he's trying to find out what's going on, and we get a hint of him maybe not really liking his dad very much. As soon as he meets Law, he loses every single hint and shred of personality that he had, because his entire personality becomes that he fancies her. And now we're trying to do the whole thing where it's like, oh, the man falls first. The man is obsessed. The man loves his woman, right? I get we're trying to do that, but he can have other personality traits as well. He can actually be his own person and not just be a simp, and that's all his traits are. I don't care about him. I don't care about him at all. Why would I care about him? He has no personality. He doesn't care about anything aside from law. Why would that make for an interesting character, you know? And then I literally have nothing to say about any of the rest of the characters because none of them really had any standout personalities or made really any impact on me or the story for me to comment on them. They were just kind of there. Didn't really care about any of them. Now, let's look at the actual writing a little bit, okay? And specifically, I would like to look at the foreshadowing in this book because in the first one specifically, it was done, in my opinion, horribly. I don't know if I made it obvious from my explanation, but it was so incredibly clear that the author was trying to pull a Rhysand. She was trying to do an ACOTAR. It was incredibly, incredibly obvious. We have I don't think he was blonde, but you know, we have the Sun King, the light one. I think he had red hair. His hair doesn't matter, but you know, he's supposed to be all good and here to help her. And yeah, initially he's kidnapped her, but he's gonna help her, right? But then we also have the chapters from the dark-haired, brooding arsehole Nadir. It was so obvious, but it was done in such a bad way. And the reason it was done in such a bad way was because, one, the foreshadowing was like being smacked in the face with a frying pan. It could not have been more obvious. When you got to the end and the reveal of like, oh my god, Atlas is an arsehole. He doesn't care that Law's upset about seeing potentially her family being in danger in the last trial. He doesn't care about her emotions. I was like, yeah, I know that. I've known that for like 200 pages. Is this supposed to be a surprise? I think what also didn't help, aside from that, maybe you could have got away with it if you didn't also have Nadir's chapters, because why would there be chapters from this random man who Law then meets at one point and they have an instant connection if it wasn't abundantly obvious that he was the main love interest and he was going to come more into it in book 2? I appreciate that is probably hard to do well since ACOTAR, because now people are maybe expecting it more. But if it's so hard to do well, like, don't try and copy it. Like, just do something else maybe, because it like, to the extent where it was frustrating to read. It made me more annoyed with Law because she was being so stupid and not noticing things. And also it just made me frustrated with the plot itself because I knew what was going to happen, but we continued to go through it as if it was going to be a surprise. And, you know, with the plot overall in general, it was just such a mess by the end. I don't think that many components needed to be added in. You know, the first book is mainly focused on the trial. And I suppose at that point, we're trying to work out, what does the Sun King know? What does the Aurora King know? And how are they trying to harm Law? Like, they were the big bads for the first 2 books, maybe. And honestly, that probably would have been enough. We didn't need to add in all these other elements. So they were like the key factors there, right? They were going to try and hurt Law. They were going to try and take her so they could access her power. But then we had the added like quest element of she needed to find the artifact of her kingdom, like the mirror that the Sun Kingdom has, to be able to get her power back. So that was difficult. That was like the quest element of going and finding something, right? That would have probably been enough. There would have been conflict there. The Sun King and the Aurora King trying to stop her. There could have been loads happening there, okay? But then we also had to add in, so for Law to become as powerful as possible, to be able to like defeat particularly the Aurora King, he was like the main big bad. To be able to defeat him, her and Nadir had to get married so her power would like come into fruition, but because they were both heirs to kingdoms, they couldn't get married because that would be bad. So there had to be like a special ritual that was done, and that was like, well, we need to find a high priestess and we don't really know where many of them are. They're super rare, and would one even be able to do it for us? Would they have the things they needed? So then that was another quest element, right? They had to go and find that, and it sounded like it was going to be really difficult. And also all of a sudden there's this god who's not really a god. She's just a fae who was told to go up to their version of heaven and look after everything, and actually she turned into a massive bitch and was being really horrible. And then they also had to find all of these other arcs to destroy her. And then also the god of the underworld, who was also just some random fae guy who had got cast down there, he was suddenly involved too. And there was just so much happening all of a sudden that was incredibly confusing. And what that meant was some of that just got solved in a ridiculous way. Like the whole thing with needing to find a high priestess, they'd made a big deal for about 2 books about how difficult this was going to be. We were getting flashbacks to the last time 2 heirs tried to do this, right? And it seemed like it basically killed everyone in the kingdom. That's why Hart has no one anymore, because they tried to do that before and everyone died. So it was like, this is gonna be a really big thing. It's gonna be really dangerous. We need to find a priestess. It's gonna be so hard. And then it was just like, oh, we found this one. She's fine. Yeah, she'll do it for us. Cool, that's sorted now. Bye. Been made up into such a huge thing. And then because there was so many other things going on, it just had to be resolved really quickly and in a really underwhelming way. Something that really did not help with this was the actual pacing of the book. It was incredibly slow in a lot of parts. And the reason for that was because the author decided from about book 2 to just keep adding more and more point of views. It wasn't like you were getting point of views of characters in the present. You were getting points of views from many different characters currently involved in things, but you were also getting points of view of people like thousands of years ago in the past. It was almost like this is a way to be able to give the world building and explain what's going on, rather than the characters discovering it themselves or like us discovering it in a different organic way. We were just being told it. It was just exposition dumps of chapters. But then you also had so many different chapters from the current character's point of view as well. It just felt like every other chapter was all of the characters coming back together and being like, we all met up and told each other everything we'd just done in the chapters you just read about. There didn't need to be that many different points of view, and there also didn't need to be that much overlap of them just filling each other in on things we'd just read. It felt like it lost its way a little bit, honestly. My final complaint, this one's a little bit more petty. You know when you discover a new word or phrase, right? And you're like, this is a really cool word. I'm gonna use this all the time now. That's fine in real life when you're having conversations with different people and like maybe it's not being noticed. But in a book where I can remember the last 30 times you used that within the last like 10 pages, it's really irritating actually. There were just certain things that were repeated so many times, and it was like each book had a different one. So in book 1 it was Law saying that she was there against her will. Everything was against her will. I lost count of the amount of times I heard her whining, I've been brought here against my will. Like literally every 5 minutes. We know, Law. We're reading, we're in your head, we're here with you. We know that you were kidnapped and brought here against your will. You don't need to keep telling us every other page. I don't remember the repetitive word of book 2. In book 3, everyone was passing things. I've realized, I don't know if I just am noticing it more as like a recency effect thing, but I am noticing a lot of authors using the word pass a lot more recently. One of those words that's becoming like, oh, this is a fancier way of saying I couldn't understand it. It's fine to use that as a word. It's fine to say you couldn't pass something or it took you a moment to pass the information. That is fine, but you don't need to use it every single time that kind of situation comes up, because it's not a word that most people use in their day-to-day language, and therefore it's really obvious that you're overusing it. Then this might have been a more consistent thing. Maybe this started like maybe in book 3 or book 2. Churn. Everything was churning. Water was churning. The sky was churning. Nadir's hips were churning. Gabriel's stomach was churning. Everything was churning. I never want to hear about a man's hips churning ever again in my life, because 1, that is a terrible description of that, and 2, no. Oh, and then this was in book 4, maybe. Nadir gets trapped in their like heaven, which is called Evanescence. He gets trapped there for a while and everything was creamy. I can't be bothered to get the book up and like try and find it, but there was, I think, a page or a paragraph that probably had the word creamy in it about 10 times. The walls, the general atmosphere, Zera, who is the god, Zera's skin, everything was creamy. It wasn't even like over a few chapters that word was used a lot. It was within like a page or 2. Just find some variation in words. There are different ways to explain things, please. It was so frustrating. I think that is all of my complaints about this series though. I don't really know if that was a particularly coherent or helpful review, but in case you couldn't tell, I would not recommend this series really to anyone. I think I've rated every single book 1 star or lower. It was purely a spite read. It was purely just because I was fueled by rage that I continued reading it. If you did like it, as I said, and you're still here, firstly, God bless you for staying to the end of this video. Secondly, I'm sorry, you know, for everything I've just said, but also I'm glad that you enjoyed it. I hope you had a good time. If you have read this, I would really love to know your opinions. Am I just angry for no reason? Would you agree? Are there any things you disagree with? Let me know. That's all from me for today. So wherever you are, I I hope you're having a wonderful day, and I will see you guys soon. Bye.